The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to everyone. Sister Robin, Brother Ugawa, Lao Tzu, Facebook user, and Lisa Grayson. We had something we had to check out before we started this show this morning. The topic for this morning is honoring the life and legacy of Dengani, a Black Arts, Black Power, Black Freedom Movement leader. We have as our guest my good friend of 62 years, Brother Norman Brown. How you doing, Norman?
I'm doing great. Glad to be on with you. And greetings to everyone.
Norman's a brother that woke me up, and we'll go through this in a minute. And he keeps waking me up. He's a real brilliant brother. So this show is going to be dedicated to Brother Dengani, also previously known as Jogan Carvers. And this is going to be the shortest of the Dr. Oba Tashaka shows. It's going to be 1 hour. And then there'll be a little room for comments. And then at 2 o'clock this afternoon, there's going to be a live broadcast of a community celebration of Brother Dengani. And so there'll be a second part to this, 2 p.m. Pacific time. And then Sonia Sanchez and a bunch of other people will be on the program. Brother Norman Brown will be emceeing it. And so you'll have the treat of that coming live. So for the past month, the show, Dr. Oba Tashaka's show, has been dedicated to African American culture, or what I prefer to call New African culture, for reasons I've discussed many times before. So the first show was entitled How African American Culture Was Created. And the second show hit the high point of the art form that Africans created an art form in enslavement, and then later evolves the highest point of the art form, which is jazz. And we had the privilege of having the master jazz alto saxophonist and player of many instruments and composer John Handy. And I consider this one of the best shows we've had because of the deep insight that came from it. And then last week's show went to the heart of African American and New African culture, which is creativity. And this is the ethos of the African in America. And it's such a common feature that we sometimes make the mistake of taking it for granted. And so the topic of last week's show was, what is the secret behind the creativity of African American people? So today's show is going to feature themes coming out of the Black freedom, Black power, and Black arts movement, centering on honoring the legacy of Brother Dengani, then known also as Joe Goncalves, who is a brother whose family came from Cape Verde and who was born in Boston in the United States. Brother Dengani was a leader in San Francisco Corps and the San Francisco Freedom Movement in San Francisco Corps. He was also a leader in the Black Power movement because San Francisco Corps led the Black nationalist wing in Corps and was a leader of the Black Power movement. And it will focus, particularly the program today will be focusing on Dengani's contributions in the Black arts movement. And today we'll touch on it. We'll put more emphasis on Dengani's role in the Black freedom, Black power movement. We'll also mention the Black arts movement. So we have Brother Norman here because Norman and I were friends of Dengani, and Norman was also a leader in the San Francisco Freedom Movement as one of the many secret weapons we had that produced the victories that we produced. Also at 2, Sister Sonia Sanchez will come on during the show. It won't be at 2. She'll be coming on at 4 Pacific time, 7 East Coast time. She was one of the leaders in the Black arts movement and a leading poet, a leading scholar, and a good friend of Dengani as well as of me as well. Also want to say before we get into this, I want to respect the work of Brother Marvin X, who played the leading role in putting together the program that you'll see today. He's one of the Black arts movement leaders, and also to his student, Dr. Nzinga, who's poet laureate of Oakland. And I know Marvin X is proud of her anytime you have a student who ascends to the realms of excellence. It makes the teacher feel real good. So we want to give him his props. He deserves that. He's put in a lot of work and effort into this. So today with Brother Norman Brown, we want to get into Brother Dengani and his qualities. But before doing that, I wanted to start off with you, Norman, telling people something about your background, where you came from, what your life has been about, and what got you involved in the Black freedom, Black power movement.
Well, thanks for the question. I'm from Edenville, Florida, a traditional all-Black town outside of Orlando, Florida. One of the first registered town with its own post office, its own postmark, and its own sheriff's department, police department, fire department. One of the basic movers in terms of the Black cities movement in the United States. And it still exists. It's still out there, and it's still practically all Black town. And it's one of the best places, one of the safest places in the country, one of the few places where people still leave their doors open. You know, at the age of 14, I moved to Rochester, New York, and went to school there, graduated from Benjamin Franklin High School. I got involved in the movement basically when I got to Rochester. I joined the junior NAACP. We had junior NAACP in those days. And we were in the business of getting Black folks, Negroes at that time, into different jobs. For instance, I was the first, at 18, I was the first Black lab technician at the University of Rochester's Strong Memorial Hospital. In fact, a short story about that. Uh, the lab techs wear white smocks, and the rest of the Black folks there had blue because they were either janitors, orderlies, or people who just helped take care of the place. So when I went to the first time I showed up at lunch with this white jacket on, a sister approached me and said, "Brother, say, listen, say they gave you the wrong color jacket." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You're supposed to have a blue jacket." See, all of the orderlies and janitors have blue jackets. I said, "I'm a lab technician." Oh my goodness! She broke down crying and announced to the lunch crowd, say, "Look, hey, look! We got a Black lab technician." That's just part of the story. I've been the first in so many things in my life that I've made a list of them, which I'll publish sometime soon. And I came from Rochester out to San Francisco in 1960, and I joined the NAACP. I still have a lifetime membership in the NAACP, which I renew from time to time, depending on which city I'm in. I had it in San Francisco. I live in Oakland now, and so I'm a member of the Oakland chapter now. But my involvement in the movement became because I saw firsthand, the colored fountains, the back of the bus. I lived that part. So, and when I came out here, I told people, "Wow, looks like I've moved up south," because there were no Black people taking any money at any of the stores. The only major department store that had a Black clerk was Sears. None of the rest of them did. And if you went to a supermarket, they didn't even have Black baggers. The only thing the Black folks did there was clean the floors and stock the shelves. So I got involved in the movement. That's when I met Over to Shaka, and then Bill Bradley and Joe Goncalves, the brother that we're celebrating today, Dengani, because I wanted to continue the movement. And I really, after the Sheridan Palace showdown led by Tracy Sims, I got involved. I was just attending a meeting, but I really got involved after that and start seeking office. I became the first vice chairman. Tashaka was the chairman. I was first vice chairman, and Dengani was second vice chairman. And as we may get into later, we were the most successful Black rights movement in the country outside of the South. There are none other that really compare in terms of the various victories that we have. In terms of education, my degree is in chemistry, and I haven't worked in chemistry since a couple of times. I served as an adjunct professor at UOP when a friend of mine needed to take a vacation. But my background is in chemistry and English, and that should bring it pretty much up to date. I worked in the community. I still serve, work, and inspire young folks in the Black community. So sometimes when people talk about the Black community, particularly those Blacks who are successful, they speak as though they're not products of the Black community, because we have the whole spectrum. Our culture has a whole spectrum, which we may get into later. But basically, that's my background, and I'm proud to be on the show. Oba Shaka has done amazing things. He credits me with waking him up. We're not sure what that means, but we're working on it. Thanks, brother.
You see, Norman didn't know he was waking me up because that wasn't his intention. We were having lunch at Virginia's restaurant, and this is one of the keys to our success. The Black community supported us. Virginia's had the largest restaurant in the Fillmore, sister from Louisiana. And so she gave core organizers 2 free meals a day. You know, the community supported us in a lot of different ways because they saw we were producing for the community. And so I pointed this out before, people who have signed up and some who need to, the sixfold stages to mental freedom. This is the guy who put me on my path. He didn't need to go on the same path coming out of an all black town. He came in with more consciousness, and I had to discover that my miseducation had made me unconscious. And Norman, through us sitting down at Virginia's, me eating some chicken. And do you remember what you were eating at that time?
Well, you know, I'm a baked chicken specialist. I shun fried food if I can help it, you know. But that's what I was having most of the time at Virginia. And her food was excellent, by the way. And I, you know, we're always grateful to that sister. She really took care of us.
Yeah. So Norman was explaining how the country worked, who ruled it. And I'm in the second year of law school. This is 1963. And I'm leading the San Francisco Freedom Movement, and we're taking on the people he's talking about, the economic power structure. So he's explaining to me, matter of fact, because coming out of New York, especially, he could see it. He said, well, you know, the people who have the economic power run the country, and blah, blah, blah. He's going on how the politicians are controlled, you know, by the people who have the economic power, and, you know, they make the basic decisions. Well, that hit me because you might think, oh, yeah, that's obvious. It wasn't then. The term power structure was only beginning to be discussed because of Martin Luther King's campaign in Birmingham, where he took on the white power structure, and they would say, who are you talking about? There ain't no white power structure. And so my education had taught me America was a democracy, and most people in the movement were about getting the democratic rights. It was a freedom movement, but we saw the right to vote in the South and stuff as a key thing. So when Norman's telling me this, it's hitting me between the eyes because my father told me this in a different way, but it went over my head. But now I'm in the movement, I'm dealing with these forces, and I'm seeing that what he's saying matches what I'm seeing. You know what I mean? These corporations are telling the mayors and the governor and other powerful political figures and dictating to the media what they should do. And so I had my oh shit moment. Norman didn't know it. I didn't tell him for 20 years later. Oh shit, I'm saying to myself, because I had bought into this democratic line, hook, line, and sinker, America's a democracy and stuff like that. And that was the beginning of my awakening. And I think 20 years later, I told Norman, you woke me up, because I realized if I didn't know my enemy, I didn't know myself. I'm locked in the battle with the biggest corporations on the planet. And it not so much I was fearing losing, it was just ignorance that really hit me that I didn't know. And so that led me on the path. I've always been a reader, but now I started reading the right stuff. And so this is the brother that woke me up. Now here I come out of, born in the Fillmore. I've explained this to people who watch the show, for 7 years of Black community. Then I'm raised in the Bernal Heights, virtually all white community. All my teachers had been white, all the way through law school. I hadn't seen a single Black teacher, except my parents, my mother and father, grandmother, great grandmother, and, you know, the community we came out of. And they were giving us solid stuff. So Norman's coming out of an all Black community. Edenville, by the way, is where Zora Neale Hurston is from. And y'all know she's my favorite when it comes to African-American culture. So Norman had come out of a different reality whereas all I saw was white people and then my family and other stuff. Norman, all he saw was Black people. So when he finally saw a white person, it was like a strange thing. And then coming out of New York, he's getting all that politicizing and everything else. You know what I mean? So I'm chair. He's my vice chair. He's teaching me. And this is also a key to success. Open your ears up and listen. So this is the brother for 62 years. We've been great friends. Anytime I have a problem, I'm calling Norman. And by the way, Norman knows more people than anybody I know. He's a real organizer. and he's one of the key reasons that our movement was successful. So I recall meeting you in core and the various exchanges and stuff we had, and the friendship that developed starting in 1960. I remember you, and because you're one of the most brilliant people we have, but we had a bunch of brilliant people, and that was also the key. And I should point out, for Black folks, when you're forming a group, the IQ quotient ain't the problem. You're going to have it. The question is, what do you do with it? You know what I mean?
That's right.
And we had plenty of that. So what do you remember about this? How we got together, we first met, and all this stuff?
Well, I remember being at one of the meetings and watching you make the presentation and lead the meeting. That was before I ran for office. I've been running for office since high school. I was the president of my junior class. Senior of my sophomore class, and the president of the student body in my graduating year. And organizing, to me, organizing is not complicated. You talk to people, you find out their concerns, and you ask them to vote for you. If politicians did that, they would have fewer problems. It's not about buying ads. It's about talking to folks and asking them to vote for you. But the thing that impressed me about the civil rights movement, including you, we had some brilliant people. And the beauty of it, in my estimation, was the fact that everybody was willing to set aside their ego and go with the best program. And even if it was your idea, let the best person implement it, not just you, because it was your idea. And our success was based on the fact that, and by the way, we never lost a struggle, not one. We were successful in all of our challenges to the power structure. And basically, because we had our stuff together, we knew more about them than they did about us. And I tell Black youngsters this all the time. We have an advantage. The advantage is that white people and other people don't believe that we can think at all, but it never occurs to them that we might outthink them. See, so we have to keep that in mind. So never back, believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. And one of the things about Dengani, very quiet brother. As a matter of fact, spoke so softly you really had to pay attention to him because he seldom raised his voice. But when he started talking, you immediately shut up and start listening, because his pearls of wisdom and his ability to analyze the situation was phenomenal. And he and I were both readers. Just, keeping score, I've read more than 10,000 books. I stopped counting when I got to 10,000. And I try to read at least 1 or 2 books a week. And I've been known to go sit in the library and read book after book. I'm a speed reader. And I've even taught speed reading. So I can read the average novel in maybe 3 hours. If it's a historical book, it might take me a little longer depending on how involved I am. And by the way, contrary to popular belief, the faster you read, the better your comprehension is, and the better your ability to tie the story and the message together. Imagine most of us read at the same speed that we talk. And that works okay when you're talking, because you don't want to talk too fast. But you don't need to do that. You don't need to verbalize to yourself. That's about the reading. And part of the thing that Dengani not only moved in the movement and his venture with the Journal of Black Poetry and the New Day Bookstore and all of the other things that he did that involved passing on knowledge to people. His main goal was to make sure that people had access, that Black people had access to knowledge. You can't force feed people. All you can do is present it to them. And he's the one that made me think of this theme years ago. And it's the title of the book that I'm writing. You are your child's master teacher. It's our responsibility to Shaka, mine, and all of the people listening. It's our responsibility to teach younger people what we know. We're not responsible for their rate of absorption. Tashaka knows that as a teacher. If you have a class of 15, 20 people, 6 of them are really engaged. The rest of them are there for the grade or for whatever reason they are. Your goal is to reach all of them, but you can't be responsible and you can't trip on that rate of absorption because everybody's different and it might not hit them until later. Like all teenagers, I was a lot smarter than my mother. But in spite of that, sometimes when I say things, my mother comes out and I just have to laugh to myself. I say, wow, she would have said that exactly that same way. So she did her job as my master teacher. And it's our job to do that for others.
Yeah, and I think your point about we lost no battles. We had victories in everything we did. And one of the reasons is that we carefully prepared before we went into a situation. Yeah. We had committees because the core structure was a committee structure. And so once we found out what the issue was that Black people wanted addressed, and this was key to our success, we asked them, we didn't act like we had the answer. Once we came up with that, then we retooled the organization to focus on that. And that issue was jobs. That is still the issue, the number one issue for Blacks throughout the country. You want the key way to get a gangster out of gangbanging, a good job. The majority will leave gangbanging. Gangbanging is a way of life for some people now because there's no viable jobs for them. Families are broken, communities are broken. But the main thing is not viable jobs. And so our jobs committee retooled and went out there and did their study. And so we would study the number of people hired and all this stuff, but we studied the corporations. And my job as strategist was to come up with the strategy that would hit. I didn't know I was a strategist until they let me loose. That's another thing about movement. You don't know your skills until you do your thing. And so I know they were watching me. So if I come up with some losing strategies, I'd have got replaced. So that was a key thing Norman's talking about. We know them better than they know us generally as a people, but generally when it's a movement, you've got to know their structures and their systems. So that was key to our success. And I think another key was our decision-making was not based on a single person. And that's been the mistake of a lot of movements where particularly the more intellectual we become or more radical we become, we decide to copy other people's systems. So a lot of people on the left who call themselves radicals, they adopt this thing called democratic centralism, which is supposed to mean that you have some ideas coming from a central body, but everybody has some input. But it actually means a few people and very often only one. Right. And then if that one person is off, the whole movement is off and makes a mistake because everybody's going to make mistakes. And so this was my rule. My rule was consensus. I didn't know that was African democracy because I didn't know what about African democracy. I didn't know that's African American culture. I didn't know. I just knew I'm a perfectionist. I don't like making mistakes. And the more people you have involved in making decisions, the fewer mistakes you're going to make. And then you're going to get buy-in. And people will think consensus is mediocrity. You'll come up with the common denominator, the weakest idea. No, the consensus is the basis for the best ideas. So that was a key thing. And in order to do that, what Norman's already stressed is humility. People got to have some humility, bury their egos. And as he said, go for the best position. And that's what we did. We always made the best move. And that's key because strategy is like a dance. And so what you need to do is make the best moves. Now, with Black folks who are good dancers, if you're a brother out here cutting your moves with a sister who can dance, you're in trouble. You know what I mean? And so the same thing when you're going up against the system, you better have some moves that produce some grooves that are knockout punches. And so that was one of the keys to the secret to the success of our movement. It is the only Northern movement that was successful in defeating an economic power structure and doing a whole bunch of other things. And Dengani played a role in that, and so did a bunch of other people. I just want to acknowledge a few, and you can acknowledge a few. Ella Hill Hutch, who was the mother of the San Francisco Freedom Movement and my mother's best friend, who was my mother's age, so a good 20, 25 years older than me and most of our members. And she was co-founder of San Francisco CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. And she always lived in a 2-room apartment and was the first Black woman elected to the Board of Supervisors, which is the governing body in San Francisco politically. So she was humble, she was open. She got me to come to my first CORE meeting and then took a background role. We did our first planning for campaigns in her apartment. But she took a background role and let us fly. And Will Essery, who was chair before me, very humble brother, very smart brother, was a draftsman and was the person I put in charge of the block by block organizing. He's the one that laid that out because at that time we had money coming from the war on poverty. I don't take money when I organize. I put him in charge because as a draftsman, he's sequential. So he believes in step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. When you're in a battle, sequential don't work. But when you're sequencing something to organize people, it works. And to this day, Will doesn't stand up and brag about his contributions, but they were major. And so we had a bunch of people like that. Can you think of a few?
Oh, yeah. Well, Kermit Scott, the father of my political organizing, I mean, one of my great mentors. And, we can talk about the Black people in our organization, but I'd like shout out to some of the Asian members like Franklin Wu and Margaret Ho, who were instrumental. And both of them actually got on our bus and went with you to the March on Washington. They were instrumental. There's Hugh Washington, newspaper man, who's still living, by the way, as far as I know. He's in his 90s. And let's see who else. I had a little short list here. Jonathan Turley, our bad boy, but really, really one of the people who we could always put out front because he would turn the heads. And don't forget DC, Don Cox, who was also a member of CORE and became one of the leaders of the Panthers later on. And those are just some of them. And Benny Holmes out of Mississippi, very instrumental, very devoted brother, devoted to the movement. Also a freedom rider like Dengani. So, when we talk about some of the people, and like I said, all of the people that were involved in our movement were willing to put their egos aside and go with the best idea. We had battles in the meetings about which would become the best idea. That's what I loved about it, because people are humble enough to listen to what other people said about their idea. Because most of us take ownership to our ideas, and we don't want anybody interfering with that because we know what we know. The problem is we don't know what we don't know, But this is just some of the people that I want to make tribute to. Ethel Jones and her family, so many people. And don't forget, we went to, because I'm a minister, we went to churches and they would give me their pulpit so I could talk about the movement. And they would give other members of our movement, so that we could talk to the members. We never isolated. We never tried to isolate them. We talked to them. We never tried to. It was not about intimidation. It was about cooperation and respect. We gave them the respect that they deserve, and for that they had a buy-in. So nobody was able to sabotage our movement by talking to other leaders in the community, whether it's real estate people or whatever. Because we talked to them, we let them have their input, and they realized that they had their input. So they supported us, and many of them made financial contributions and other contributions. But that's just a shout out to some of the people that were involved. There are many, many more.
Yeah, and one of the key features of the San Francisco Freedom Movement, we had no ego differences inside the organization, core, and we were the cutting edge because we led most of the campaigns, but we had no ego issues with the NAACP, the Bayview Hunters Point Citizens Committee, the ad hoc committee that made up students from UC Berkeley and San Francisco State, the Baptist Ministers Union, which I had to do some arm twisting to get a consensus agreement in core to align with, because as a strategist, I told them, when we're going against department stores, you can't beat them without the church. We got to boycott. And, it's going to be the preachers going to the pulpit. And in this case, we did have preachers with big egos. And, but the way you satisfied them was give them publicity. You wrote the press releases. I wrote them. And, you let them read from the press release and get credit. They could be on the front page, but you were running that coalition. And as long as we needed them, it worked. So we didn't have differences organizationally. There was a common bond of brotherhood and sisterhood, so much so that if you take a group like the Urban League, which could be considered a conservative organization, the head of the Urban League was a guy named Percy Steele. And our relationship was so close that if an issue came up that was real serious, and he's in Los Angeles, which is down in Southern California, I pick up the phone and call him and say, hey, Percy, we need you up here. He'd be back on a plane flying up because he saw how serious this movement was and we weren't playing. And I pointed this out before for some people that have heard this, but most of you haven't. When we were infiltrated, the black cops would come to me and tell me, you're infiltrated. They wouldn't tell me who. And then we'd set up traps. And Norman and particularly Dengani, they did a lot of screening. He can get into this later. He's telling me some stuff I didn't know because these guys are doing behind the scenes work. But one of these guys who was agent, who really didn't fit the organization, he wasn't smart. First of all, everybody in the organization was smart. He wasn't from the area in which we were organized, and he was from the Hunters Point. There were a number of things that didn't fit, but he to this day doesn't know we clocked him and moved him out, but he never knew why he got moved out. You know what I mean? So all of that, because of the way in which we operated, the community came forward and covered our back in a whole lot of ways because we were taking care of the community's best interests. Now let's talk about Dingane. Let's talk about how you got to know him and how I got to know him, what kind of person he was like, his personality, and his interests.
Well, I got to know him because he and I ran the office. We were in the office on basically a daily basis. And while we were there, we would talk about the books that we had read, about the people that we met, and we talk about various things that were going on in the community. And like I say, it was hard to get him to talk because he very carefully thought before he opened his mouth. He made sure that his brain was engaged. And one of the things that I respected about him is that if it was in small talk, it was about small talk, we could get into that. But when we were talking about serious stuff, he was very serious. And the thing that I love, to me, it's just like if you talk about the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah. With me, you need to go chapter and verse because I've probably read it or I'm going to read it after you talk to me about it. One of the things I loved about Dengani, he's always had references. He always had
what?
References, books and places that he could find, that he could point you to, direct you to, that would back up what he had to say. But part of the thing that we did in the office on him, and one of the reasons I got to know him so well, was that we screened everybody who came to the office and said that they wanted to become a member. We take down their information and we do some follow-up. We do some background checking, Oh, where are you from? I'll never forget this guy. He said he came from Chicago. He was a member. White guy said he was a member of RAM. And Larry Lawrence, who was a good friend of mine and a business partner of mine, he and I had a consulting firm. I was part of his consulting firm. So he said, he talked about Larry and talked about the whole movement. And I called Larry and I said, wait a minute. He said, when did we get white members? I said, I don't know. I just met one of them. He said, man, come on now, you know better. So, but we didn't tell him, he never got to a meeting. He got to a committee meeting, but he never got to one of our regular meetings. Part of what Dengani did in a quiet way was take down the notes, listen to what people had to say. And when they would leave, we would talk about it. We do background checks. Okay, they said they came from such and such a place. Oh yeah, I know somebody back there. Let me call them and find out what they know about this person. And a lot of times it was disconnected. They were giving us information because they didn't feel that we were going to follow up on it. And he and I both like words, like the difference between the way a word is used now and the way a word was used in the past. So he had a collection, and that's part of the base of his bookstore, the New Day bookstore. He had a collection of old thesaurus that would tell you the words. So that was in 1912, a conference that some people can look up, where they changed the meanings of a lot of words. Sometimes when I feel like being a comic, I challenge people who call themselves a lady. Historically, a lady was the king's concubine. The queen was his wife and was always referred to as either the queen or the wife. If it was lady somebody, it was somebody's, other woman, But we talk about that, and they changed the meaning of that. They changed the meaning of a lot of words in that conference that they had in 1912. But we would talk about things like that. And Dengani was a researcher. He was always reading about things and a lot of the things that he read about, because of his interest in Egyptology and African history, that I'd never heard of. So, that's how we got involved with Richardson, Julian Richardson, because I would ask him a lot of the books that Dengani recommended to me were not on the open market, but Richardson had the ability to get books that were out of print or books that were just no longer available in stores. He had that ability, and he was responsible. I ordered the whole J.A. Rogers. I have the whole collection of J.A. Rogers books, and I got them through him. And Dengani was the first person that turned me on to J.A. Rogers. If you're going to read J.A. Rogers, read from Superman to Man first before you read anything else that he wrote. And because from Superman to Man will tell you who you are and where you came from. But like I say, Dengani's thing was about knowledge, and he's a very dedicated person in terms of the struggle. He was engaged, one of the few members who I think he probably spent a longer time in jail than any of the other members. I never went to jail, and that was part of our strategy. A part of it was that I would stay back because I was first vice chairman, and that I would not expose myself to arrest so that I could lead the charge of getting everybody else out of jail, because I could go to Attorney Willie Brown and other people's and help raise bail money, which was part of my job, as the bag man, help get the bail money. But like I say, he was a very serious brother, and I think he spent 6 weeks or more.
6 months in jail.
6 months in jail, behind, arrest for legitimate reasons. Not, I'm not talking about anything criminal. We get charged, and we selectively expose ourselves to arrest with local issues, never federal things. When we went against the Bank of America, we made sure that we didn't get arrested because that's a federal charge. But, we thought these things through, and that's what I said about it. People were humble enough to think things through. And I'll never forget Dengani, when he opened the bookstore, I spent a lot of time there with him. Sometimes when he got new books, I'd help stock the book, because I know the library system, and it was set up basically on that kind of system so that he could always point to where his books were. great brother, and it's worthy. He's worthy of the tribute that we're paying to him.
Yeah, he's an example of a lot of unknown freedom fighters who have come out of different periods of struggle, who've made major contributions, and you know nothing about them. And these are people that were key to a movement's success. And so that was definitely the case with him. Dengani, I first came to realize who he was when a member came up to me. I'm chairing the organization and tells me, there's a brother back there. He's real quiet, but you should check him out. You know what I mean? And so I went and checked him out. And I said, oh, Dengani was very dry. He didn't have a fiery personality. He was a true introvert, but had great ideas and great deal, which was true of all of our members, integrity, whole lot of integrity. What he said and what he did, they matched. And so he became a person among many that I would go to for counseling, for ideas. He's 2 years older than me, but the age didn't have anything to do with it. It was his depth. And so one of the things, because Dengani for me was both a leader in CORE, chair of the education committee, but when we moved to form an organization after CORE, he's also playing a key role at that point. And so he was heavily involved in that. And one of the things he was involved in was writing the introduction to my first book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X, who was rated #1 against all books on Malcolm, New York Times, according to Michael Eric Dyson. I always take that. New York Times don't mean 2 cents to me. But if you're going to say that, right, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it. And so he wrote the introduction, but while I was writing the book, I was collaborating with him, getting ideas from him, suggestions. And that's what we did all along. There were key points, turning points. He was there. He was like a key person and would make some very important strategic offerings in terms of ideas. So that was his brilliance. And so it was a member pointing out to me that, hey, that guy back there, because if you were going on what he was saying, just like Donald Cox, you hardly ever heard from him. But those are sometimes the people you need to be most aware of, because as Norman said, when they speak, you better listen, because they haven't been running their mouth all the time. They've been considering things. When they put things on the table, they are generally solid. And Dingane was also a freedom rider, which he never told me. There's another thing. He never bragged about anything he did in the movement. The freedom rides were launched by the National Office of CORE in 1960 to challenge segregation on the buses going across state lines. James Farmer, the national director of CORE, had revisited what had been done in the 40s by CORE, a group called the Fellowship of Reconciliation. This became a national movement. It put CORE on the map, and as a result, CORE became the only organization among the big three: Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, King's Organization, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. It was the only one that had a presence across the country. SNCC and CORE were based, SNCC and the SCLC were based in the South. And SCLC tried to break out and come north and didn't succeed in doing that. And SNCC began to have a big impact on the North with Black Power, but didn't organize a base in the North. And so Farmer put the organization on the map with the Freedom Rides, and Dengani took part in that. Never said he did, and that was a big deal. And I only found out about that when we were talking to his first wife when we were planning this program for Dengani. And so there was a lot of understatement with him, which was typical of the movement. So let's talk about specifically um, the overall significance of the San Francisco freedom movement, as you see it, Norman, and how Dengani fit into that.
Well, one of the things I tell young people, say if you go to a bank, any bank now, and it's not a black bank, and you see a black teller, or you see any teller of color, as we use the term now, that's a tribute to the San Francisco freedom movement. Because prior to that movement and the challenge and ultimate defeat of the Bank of America, uh, they only had white tellers, and even in the Hispanic areas or Spanish speaking areas, they had an Anglo who spoke Spanish. They didn't have native Mexicans or other people who were native Spanish speakers. In Chinatown, they had no choice but to have Chinese because no Anglos spoke Chinese. They could have hired some of the black youngsters who spoke Chinese because the Chinese community had supported black students and teaching them Chinese for years and years, and there were many of them available. But when you start talking about the movement, and also when you go back to the banks, you could be a teller for all of your life because there was no program inside of the bank for advancement. One of the achievements of our movement against the Bank of America is that all of the banks developed an education system where you could go from a janitor in a bank to becoming a vice president because they had courses you could take. They had a path. They set up a path. Prior to that, the path was who you knew. Now the path is what you know and how much you want to engage yourself in the work. And same thing with the stores, like I said earlier, Sears was the only major department store that had any black sales associates. None of the rest of them did. When we took them on, the Downtown Merchants Association, and by the way, the union that represented their members opposed our movement to integrate the store clerks. If your tailor was probably black, your seamstress was probably a black woman, but you never saw them unless you had to go back and get measured. But they didn't handle any money. They didn't sell you anything. We took these movements on, and like I said earlier, we were successful for many reasons. One of the reasons was basically being well organized. And see, Dengani, in terms of his ability to organize, we would sit down and he would say, okay, we need to talk to people here. We need to go, the ministers, and we need to talk to the leaders. We need to talk to teachers if we want to get the students involved. We need to talk to the principals. And he was a good strategist, but like I said, he was very underspoken. He never, like I said, because he spoke so softly, you had to listen. And then once you started, you realize, wow, he's got something. He really knows what he's talking about. And that's why I love him, because like I say, we love books and we love words, but we love the movement. And he was a dedicated soldier. I call him a truly quiet revolutionary in the truest sense. And I'm pretty sure that if somebody pulled his FBI file, they'd probably describe him the same way. But Dengani was very key in terms of the movement. And you'll learn later, particularly with Marvin X and Sonia Sanchez, about his influence in the Black arts movement. He was a key figure. A lot of the people that you know now, Sonia Sanchez among them, were first published in the Journal of Black Poetry. The first excerpt from Soul on Ice by Elvis Cleaver was published in the Journal of Black Poetry. I remember because I helped print it, But like I say, he was an influencer who never stood on the podium to do it. He always, we always sat down quietly and he make these presentations. Like I said, you listen because he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, this is This is a picture up here. Yeah, this is a picture of the Journal of Black Poetry, a cover. And then below it, you see a brother in a dashiki. That's a Skia Torre, then known as Roland Snellings. He was one of the leading Black poets in the Black arts movement. And that cover there was a cover of one of the many journals of Black poetry that Dengani, the brother with the little E on there, that's in his recent incarnation. He lived to be 84 years old, going on, 84 years old, going on 85. He was 2 years older than me. In terms of putting him in the context of the San Francisco freedom movement, I pointed this out to some people who have watched the show before. For others who are new, this is new to you. The San Francisco freedom movement, as Norman said, was the only successful Black freedom or Black power movement in the 60s up to now in the North. The Southern movement was successful in what it went after: voting rights legislation, civil rights legislation, ending formal apartheid in the South. And in the case of the Montgomery bus boycott, the biggest of all of the victories, ending segregation in the buses. So that the Southern movement had their victories. Main reason is they had a method that worked. And they were also coming out of Black culture. And Black culture is very creative. We often don't give ourselves credit for that. So they had two methods that worked. One was the demonstration, and the demonstration put pressure on the federal government because it made them look like savages in Birmingham and Selma, and the boycott. So those two methods worked. They had working methodology. But in the North, the Black freedom and Black power movements were helter-skelter. They were all over the place. They had some things that worked. Cleveland, they got a Black man elected mayor. Carl Stokes, first Black person elected mayor. They had an economic development program. And in Brooklyn, they had some very good chapters, particularly Brooklyn core itself, and some good leaders, and produced a few results. But across the board, victories in the North, it didn't happen for a number of reasons. One, some were trailing behind the Southern movement and imitating their methods. And so they would have marches and demonstrations and stuff like that, but no concrete results in many cases because they hadn't identified the issue that the people wanted. And you'd only know that by asking the people. In the South, you could ask the people, you didn't have to. You knew it was segregation. You knew it was the denial of the right to vote. Mm-hmm. It was the issue of dignity. It was the issue of freedom. And the issue of freedom and dignity was true in the North too. It still is. But you got to put some bread on it. And so when we went out and asked people, what was the issue? Jobs. That was it. Jobs. Police were important, but they didn't say police first. Because at that point, at the end of World War II, there were no jobs in the Black community. That was across the country in most cases. And so then we came up with methods that worked on the job front. We did not copy the South. We came up with our own strategies.
That's right.
Different strategies for different employers. And there are some strategies like the Bank of America. If I ask Norman, he can tell you what that one was, because that was the only one where I didn't have the strategy in advance. I had to put together a team of people that came up with it. And because I don't fight until I know how to win. And to this day, the bank doesn't know how they were whipped. And I'm not telling you how they were whipped.
Right.
Until the book comes out, you won't know. And we weren't supposed to be able to bring down the biggest bank in the world, in the biggest state in the United States. And in fact, when that victory was won, a Black preacher called me into his office. He was a Methodist minister. He wanted to hire me. And he said, y'all in core, you went up against the Bank of America. You were like David and Goliath. All you had was a slingshot. And you threw your slingshot out there and you knocked Goliath down. You know what I mean? Little did he know, our slingshot was a strategy. It was a very sophisticated strategy. 3 months of negotiation. We didn't know how long we'd be in the streets. 11-city campaign from Northern to Southern California. And we whipped them. The day after we whip them, I get a call from the Wells Fargo, again, one of the leading banks in the world. And the president of Wells Fargo is calling me. And he says, if you could whip the biggest bank in the world, we know you could whip us. We're hiring. That was it. And I said, okay. So the significance of San Francisco freedom movement is we defeated an entire economic power structure on the issue of jobs. We didn't go after single employers. We went after industries. So we defeated the downtown department stores through the boycott. We defeated the hotel and restaurant industry through mass demonstrations. And that was huge number of hotels, the downtown department stores, a huge number of department stores. We would defeat a whole industry by taking the weakest link and knocking it out, and the rest would fall. And then, we took on the supermarkets, the best paying jobs we got in the movement. Safeway and Lucky's out here are the two major supermarkets. Safeway went along, so we didn't have to demonstrate against them. They were smart enough. The majority of our victories were won without a fight, by the way. That's the art of war. But Lucky's refused, and so we dropped some strategies on them. I won't say what they are, but they nearly put them out of business. And that was the strategy they came up with on the spot because the boycott didn't work. So we defeated them. And to this day, those jobs we produced then are still there now. And in the case of the supermarkets, those are union jobs with healthcare benefits and retirement.
That's right.
When we walk through there and see black, brown, red, and yellow people, mainly black, working in there, we know that's the result of our effort. And then, we took on the auto industry, and that was led by the NAACP because by then we had a united front and defeated them. You could buy a car, but couldn't sell one. And so defeated them. And then the campaign against the Bank of America. So we defeated an entire economic power structure. Then we organized 45,000 black people block by block. That was done nowhere in the country. The only other place where that was done was Denmark Vesey's rebellion, in which he organized a cell structure. And to this day, we don't get it. Power is in the hands of your people. We mystify power. Where is power? It's in the corporations if you're dealing with white people. It's their military industrial complex. It's all of that. But with us, it's in the people. And when you organize blocks, you organize the people. And we're the only movement in the country that has done that. And to this day, the nationalists, the so-called conscious black folks run away from this. You need to organize your blocks. And where neighborhoods have been broken up, pockets, where there are pockets of people. And this is the method that's worked all over the world. And then we built King Garvey housing complex. And we radicalized the free speech movement at UC Berkeley, which is the premier higher education institution of the world, producing more Nobel laureates than all of the Ivy League universities put together. We radicalized them, and they said so. And it led to them coming up with a free speech movement that spread across the country, spread to France, and nearly led to the overthrow of the French government. You understand? We didn't know we had that power, but it demonstrated to us that we have the power to, because of our strategic location, to create chain reaction. So when we do something, we cause other people to do something. The Minister of Culture of the Black Panther Party, Emory Douglas, was on the show, and he was making the point that Native American people said they were inspired by the Black Power, Black Freedom movement to organize the American Indian movement. Now, if you're inspiring Native Americans who have their own inspiration, have been fighting for liberation since we've been here and even before, then that means that you've got some real strategic power. And then we gave birth to the Experimental College of San Francisco State that's a forerunner of Black studies. And Sonia Sanchez will be talking about her role in teaching in that in 1968. So this was no joke. This movement was no joke. And of all the organizing I've done, it was the most important. And Dengani was playing a key role in that. He got arrested. That's 6 months in prison. That was the longest time that anybody served in the movement. I served a week for being late to a court hearing, and I was facing a long sentence. The way I got off was this. My barber, who was a sister, happened to be the barber of the judge, Judge Kennedy, who was going to sentence me. And I told her to tell him I wasn't taking any deal. It was not going to be jail, no bail, or nothing. You know what I mean? I wasn't accepting a sentence. And so she told him, don't be putting that man in jail. And as a result, I didn't serve any time on that one. It was my barber that saved me on that one. You know what I mean? But so again, it's your community that has your back. Dengani was playing a major role in that, and very often did not talk about his contribution there. And by the way, our members, you've often pointed this out, that there was an unspoken rule among our members in CORE that none would profit from the movement. You want to talk about that one?
Oh yeah, that was very important because we produce jobs, and normally the people the power structure that we were going up against would offer us the first jobs, but none of us took them. I drove a cab, and I mean, when I first started working in the poverty program, that was because that was part of the strategy to get the organization. And as we talked about it, Will was the chairman. I mean, he was the director. I was second in charge. I was in charge of the field operations. People that worked for me went to every block every house in every block of the Fillmore. We didn't tell people what we were going to do for them. We asked them what they wanted done. And when we put our program together, it was based on what people in the neighborhood said that they wanted. And all the time, the leading concern was jobs, and then followed by education. We worked in all of those areas, and we gave them a chance to speak up. And they always felt welcome at our board meetings, because it was not an elitist organization. Like I say, all of us buried our egos and did what we thought was best and what we knew people wanted, because we had asked them in advance. We knew what we were talking about, and we could say, this is what so-and-so wants. I also got to give a shout out to local street person, one of the most dynamic members. We haven't mentioned his name, Abe Landry. I mean, brother Abe Landry, one of the best street, could talk to anyone. And if you want to, whether it's church member, street person, or whoever it was, Abe could talk to him, and they listened. He's a very, very important member. And as far as I know, he's still alive. He's in his 90s. So, we were very fortunate. We came along at a time where people were concerned. And I'll say this in closing. The Black community is the most organized community in the world. We just lack coordination. We need central committee types, but not based on anything that Saul Alinsky. Speaking of Saul Alinsky, we ran him out of town. He copied our methods. We came long before Saul Alinsky, and we did things that he never even dreamed of. So when people say that we are students or acolytes of Saul Alinsky, nothing could be further from the truth. He learned and wrote down things that he learned from us.
Yeah, in fact, read my books, volume 1 and 2, The Art of Leadership, based on when I wrote it. It took 10 years to write, came out in 1990. I had 30 years of organizing experience. Now it's 63. And this was based on victories. Saul Alinsky had no victories. And in fact, Obama learned a lot of his organizing from Saul Alinsky. And Obama had no victories, not in Chicago. You know what I mean? So he was like the Elvis Presley of rhythm and blues. Somebody, except he didn't have talent. I have to give Elvis Presley some credit for his time. He copied us pretty good. Saul Alinsky wasn't even a good copyist. You know what I mean? And so a lot of the failure of our ability to fight redevelopment had to do with the fact that groups that popped up to fight redevelopment had been trained by Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky had no victories in Chicago around that. So how are you going to give anybody advice on something about how to win when you haven't won anything. You understand? So go to our own sources. So let's just wrap this up by just going over some of Dengani's role in both the Black Power and Black Arts movement.
Well, the Journal of Black Poetry, the premier publication for the Black Arts movement. There's still some, there's still some in existence. I know that you have some, Tashaka, and I think Marvin X has some. It's a very, very important book in terms of movement. Sonia Sanchez, so many. I can't think of all the names now, but so many of the people that are known now, particularly poets and writers, got introduced to the community and to the world through the Journal of Black Poetry. As I said, Dengani was a very forward-thinking person. And when he published that magazine, it had art in it, it had writings in it, and he was a great editor too. I mean, part of my education is English, but he was a great editor in terms of putting things together and making sure that they made sense and that they were correct. It's a good example of a publication that is timely and timeless. And a lot of people owe their success. A lot of poets in particular owe their success to the Journal of Black Poetry. And unfortunately, Aubrey Labrie is not available for this conversation, but in terms of his work with Dengani, he would have been an excellent addition to a person who actually knew him and worked with him, particularly in the publication world, But he was key in the Black Arts movement because he helped bring people together and tie them together. And he was also very important in Marvin X's life. And Marvin will tell you in a later edition about his relationship with Dengani, which was very important. And Marvin gives him that credit. And I'd like to credit Marvin for helping put this presentation and this memorial to Dengani. Marvin's worked his butt off, and I give him all the credit that he deserves.
Yeah, he definitely does.
Yeah.
And he's also an outstanding artist coming out of the Black Arts movement as a poet. Dengani, when he leaves CORE, I'm going to talk about two phases here. With the Black Arts movement, he's working on a journal called Black Dialogue Magazine.
Right.
Black Dialogue Magazine was put together by a brother named Aubrey Labrie, who later became an attorney. And Black Dialogue was a political journal, and it published a lot of writings of cutting-edge thinkers. So Dengani was on the board of that and noticed that a lot of poetry was coming through and no place to publish it. And by the way, I wrote an article in Black Dialogue Magazine on the San Francisco Freedom Movement. So Dengani then realizes there's a need to have a journal of Black poetry. And that's what leads him to put together the Journal of Black Poetry. It's the journal that published the largest number of poets. It didn't have the circulation that the biggest journals had, but it had the quality, and it was long lasting. It went on for many years, and Dengani funded it out of his pocket, which was typical of someone coming out of the Black Freedom Movement, which was self-financed. We didn't get any funding or anything, and we had very little money. And it was a quality publication. Other than the first one that was published on a mimeograph machine, it was published on a printing press and Norman Help. And Dengani learned how to print and learned from Julia Richardson, who owned Marcus Bookstore and was one of the fathers to us. He was a teacher to me, to Asa Hilliard, to Wade Nobles and others, because when we read, we go to him. That was the university of the community, was Marcus Bookstore.
That's right.
Just as Michelle's bookstore was the University of the Community in New York and was a major university for Malcolm X. Malcolm would fall asleep in the stack of books at Michelle Bookstore. I got my 2 volumes on Marcus Garvey, $100. I pointed out before, one of 300 copies of Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey at Michaud's bookstore. So Dengani then sets up the Journal of Black Poetry, and then to show his humility, he brought in guest editors. And so you had Amiri Baraka, former Leroy Jones, Marvin X, Askia Muhammad Toure, Ed Spriggs, and many others, leading playwrights, leading writers and poets who were featured as editors. And of course, he was the person in charge of the journal, but he's always bringing other people in to play a role. Dudley Randall, who published huge number of writers, it had a bigger circulation, but when he was guest editor once, he said the quality of the Journal of Black Poetry is the best quality and the volume of the quality is the greatest. Toni Morrison published in the Journal of Black Poetry. Nobel Prize winner. Nikki Giovanni, her first poem was published in the Journal of Black Poetry, one of our leading poets. And Sonia Sanchez, as she will say today when she speaks, when she was teaching at the experimental college with the San Francisco Freedom Movement gave birth to, she would send her students from class to Dingani's place to assemble the Journal of Black Poetry. And then she told me when I talked to her yesterday to sell the journal. And she just has nothing but love for Dengani. So that was the big role he played in the Black Arts Movement, along with New Day Bookstore, which was a Black bookstore that he financed and ran. But in core, when we are now moving 65, we've succeeded in our victories. And so now he went with me to the National Core Convention in Durham, North Carolina, 1965, where he and I talked about what needed to happen to transition the movement from the Black freedom movement to what we now call Black power. We didn't call it Black power then, we called it Black nationalism. And so we came up with a series of recommendations that needed to be adopted by National Core so that it could be relevant in the next phase. Remember, 65 was the turning point period. King in 65 had reached the stage of saying the movement's a human rights movement. And he reached a radical stage as a revolutionary of restructuring the country, wanting to do so. Malcolm was assassinated in 65, but he had reached similar conclusions. And so with CORE, he and I went down to Durham in 65, July of 1965, and I was put in charge of the resolutions committee. Dingane was participating in that, and the thoughts that I put forward were partially his. And we called for restructuring CORE. This was not Black Power, a slogan. This was a program. And so what did it call for? A, take the white money out of CORE. See, at the local level, we didn't have any. Whatever money we had, it came from Black people. We were scrounging to pay the rent every month. But at the national level, they got funding from labor unions, from Jewish organizations, from the Democratic Party, from foundations. And when you have that kind of funding, strings get attached. And so that was one of the resolutions. And then we had a series of proposals for restructuring chapters because we had built up a successful grassroots organization. And so we wanted to be sure that chapters were reflecting the communities that they were in. And we were proposing dismantling certain chapters, rebuilding other chapters. And I was in charge of this resolutions committee. And so we had chapters from most of the country and field secretaries. These are the full-time organizers in the South and in the North. And they all signed on to this. So there were actually 33 resolutions. The 33rd one was to vote whites out. That was the only one that didn't pass at that convention because James Farmer, who was married to a white woman, but he put it up and put it out, that could not be implemented in 1 year because it required a notice. It required a year's notice. So it took a couple of years before that happened. So all of those resolutions were passed. Unfortunately, James Farmer in the fall in New York, I went to the South and did things and then stayed at Farmer's house. He got this reversed by one vote. And that's when I decided to leave CORE. And so Dengani is playing a big part helping me rebuild a new organization, Afro-American Institute, to become Pan-African People's Organization. And we're getting Black businesses to finance it. He plays a part in that. When we're moving to build Martin Luther King Marcus Garvey housing complex, he's on the board of directors of that. And when Eldridge Cleaver wants to discuss having a plebiscite, a vote on whether or not we would vote to secede from the U.S. and have a nation in the South or not, he meets with me and Dengani. And Dingane and I told him it wasn't a good idea because Black people ain't voting for it. Me, I wasn't in that position of thinking that that was an achievable objective at that point. And I was at that point a Garveyite. I believed in Africa and all this stuff. But the key point is we were sharing ideas on that. And he came to us because, you know, we'd come out of this movement and we were building another movement. And so, you know, Eldridge was there. At the point in which Eldridge Cleaver and Marvin X meet at my house to get me to support a rally for Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's widow, which is 1966. And this was a meeting in which Huey Newton and them provided armed protection along with the group called the Black Panther Party from Northern California, a guy named Kenny Freeman, later Mamadou Lumumba, also led. So Eldridge came to ask me to support that, and I said I would. And I had some other things to say to Eldridge, not so complimentary that I won't go into here. And so I had been attacked in the Hunters Point the week before. Dengani was with me, and his wife mentioned she was there too. She was pregnant. I didn't remember that. And I was attacked by 18 guys from Adam Rogers' gang. This was a gang, and Norman knows about this part, who worked with the Mayor Alioto. Alioto did not want Blacks to have a base in the Hunters Point. And that's where we were launching our organization. We had had a meeting a couple of weeks earlier. Dengani took part in that. 400 Black people to launch what became Pan-African People's Organization that still operates today. And so I'm got a cast on. I mean, laid some people out. It was 18 guys coming after me. Fortunately, they didn't come after Dengani because he wasn't the type to be fighting. And I'm glad they didn't come after him. And so I called up Dengani and I told him, I said, I'm in no shape to go to this meeting where Betty is speaking. It's in the same place where I was attacked. I said, I want you to go. He went. And I can't tell you what he heard. And when I asked all the Blacks that attended this meeting, what did Betty say? They don't remember. He did. And the last time we talked, he reminded me of exactly what she said. And that will be in my revised version of the political legacy of Malcolm X. So that brother was as key to me in core as he was outside. You know what I mean? Because he was constantly growing and developing. And then we had a connection later with the United Kingdom. And so we hooked him up with book distribution systems by Blacks in the UK, a brother named Pepperkai, who came out and visited him and set up a thing so that they could buy books from him and also send him books not available in the US. So that was a constant thing. And then by the end, I was calling Dengani for the last year and a half before he passed. And we were sharing ideas, and I was telling you that I had talked to him and you called him. And then his lovely youngest daughter, who took care of him, we got to talk. And then he got to watch this show for the last 6 months of his life. Because when I told him, I'm doing a show on Facebook and YouTube, I could hear his voice perk up. Really? Because, see, this is a communicator. And in his age, he's communicating with the Journal of Black Poetry. He's hearing Blacks communicate verbally. And so me, an old warhorse, I'm up here on Facebook and YouTube. Really? And so his daughter said he was watching the show and liked it. And then when he became incapacitated because he ended up with brain cancer, he could still hear. I dedicated a show to him and he listened. And I got Sonia Sanchez to call him so she was able to get into his ear and talk to him a couple of times before he passed. So this is a brother who's dear to my heart, as I know he is to yours. He's in heaven up there and we're honoring him because he's the best of us. And you got to
Absolutely.
honor your best. You hear me?
Absolutely. May the peace and blessings of Allah be with him.
Say that again.
May the peace and blessings of Allah be with him.
Right on. Right on. And at one point, Norman was a photographer for the Nation of Islam and actually sat at the table with Elijah Muhammad. Norman's been everywhere. Everywhere you haven't been, and I'm not going to believe it.
I still got some places on my list.
Okay, that's it. Is there anything you'd like to wrap this up with, Norman?
No, I think it's, it's fitting that we honor Dengani, a very important brother to us personally and important to the movement. And like I said, may the peace and blessings of Allah be with him. He was a worthy servant.
Right on. And people should put this show back on at 2, and there'll be a live broadcast of the community commemoration for Dingane held in Oakland at 2, going until 2 Pacific time, which is 5 New York or East Coast time. And Sonia Sanchez will be coming on at 4 Pacific time and 7 New York time to make her comments. And there'll be a whole lot of other things going on in this program, which Norman Brown will be emceeing. And the question is, how do you spell his name? Dingane, Dingane, Dingane. He named himself after the brother to my namesake, Tashaka, and I won't go into what their relationship was like, but I found it interesting that he took that name,
right.
Dengani, also known as Jogan Calvis. And I want to stress his parents came from Cape Verde, the island off of Guinea-Bissau, and Amilcar Cabral, his parents came from Cape Verde, and he was born in Guinea-Bissau and tried to unite both the island Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau in the struggle for liberation. So Dengani, I'm going to say right on, brother. Keep on pushing and look out for us where you are.
That's right.
We need your ideas and support. And if any skullduggery is coming along, you want to visit me in a dream or something, or tell me not to go here or there, give me a nudge.
Come on with it.
Okay, let's open this up and see if there are any questions or comments. And then we got to go because Norman's got to go to the site, and so do I. But let's see if there are any comments or questions. Okay. Thank you, Brother Shabazz. People are talking about the Sankofa symbol, and that is drawing back to go forward. Okay, Ty 13, I did email you, Baba, about my book. Send me another email, and I'll check it, because I did get an email recently, and it's probably what you're talking about. And thanks, Ty 13. See if there's anything else. Oh, okay. There's a person here, last name Kumbo. I still have my mother's copies of the Journal of Black Poetry. This is so informative. Yeah, one of the things that we didn't mention is the Journal of Black Poetry wasn't just a Black poetry journal. It was a political journal. So you had a lot of deep political thought in there, because Dengani was as much a political thinker as he was a poet. In fact, I would say even more a political thinker, People are responding to your reading thing. Brother Shabazz, leaders not profiting from the movement is key. Mark Morrell, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton are all millionaires. Sharpton and Jesse have never had real jobs. Not sure about Mark Morrell. Yeah, very true. Very true. The real value of being involved in a movement for our people is what you learn, and it's serving your people. What's your comments on that, Norman?
Well, I'm always leery of the criticisms of Jesse and Sharpton, and really the reason I say that is true that they've benefited from their work in the movement. But when you see a black or brown driver crawl out of a beverage truck, the driver should be thanking Jesse Jackson. They've made their contributions. I have my own criticisms. I know both of them personally. I have my own criticisms of their efforts. But are we to judge people by only their weaknesses or by their contributions, you know? And I hear that a lot of times, particularly from Glenn Lowry and some of the other people. And, you know, my question for Glenn is, should we judge you by your weakest period during your drug addiction? Or should we judge you by the broader contribution that you made? I acknowledge the contributions that you made and continue to make. So, you know, I think, I know that we're harder on each other than we are on other people. And we have a real problem with holding white people accountable. We find all kinds of reasons. For instance, in the shootings and things like that, we rush to tear down the character of a Trayvon Martin. And we never say anything about Zimmerman's character. We don't talk about the history of the cop that killed Floyd, about his history of abuse of other people. We don't talk about that, but we jump on Floyd's character. We, you know, and sometimes, you know, we are so critical of ourselves, and we really do blame the victim as often as not, you know, but, you know, let's show some balance. And like I said, in terms of Sharpton and Jackson, they've made some real solid contributions. They have their flaws. We're all flawed, but we all keep, you know, let's keep moving. And let people call Sharpton. You know, he doesn't have to invite himself. They call him because they want him to do those eulogies. I wouldn't want that job. I wouldn't want, you know, I wouldn't want to be involved at that level. I love working with the community and working with youngsters, and I'll stay with that. But I'll talk, you know, when I'm talking about them, I'll talk about my own contributions. And those who criticize him, put your contributions out there first, so that your criticism will be valued. Balance it with the contributions that you've made. That's just my thing, you know. But and like I said, I'm real tough on people who are quick to criticize people or to tear down the character of other Black folks. That's my piece. With that, I'm complete.
Brother Worley Smith says, thank you, Brother Norman Brown, for your concern, work, and commitment to the struggle. May you stay healthy and go all the places you want to go. Peace. Right on. I say
Thank
that.
you. Love it. Thank you.
Oh, Norman. Let's see. There's a question here, Ty 13-313. Can the elders do a presentation on Amos Wilson? Well, we'll see about that in the future. Wilson made a great contribution.
Right.
And his book on Black Power is exceptional. You know, it's one of the thickest books I've ever seen. Of course, mine's as thick. I just put a 10-point font.
Oh, you're worthy. Worthy.
Yeah, I know some people have trouble with length. Well, it's the depth, baby. Oh, it took a long time. You know what I mean? But what do you have to say? You know what I mean? Ty 313, but I definitely won't give up. That fire in me has also been lit since the 5th grade. Reading past where my teacher told me and my blood boiled. Even then, I could feel our ancestors and promise them. So Ty 313 is saying reading's important. And I think,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Leaders are readers.
Teach. Got that right. And if they don't, then you're going to see a lot of stuff repeated that indicates that there's a lot of emptiness going on upstairs. Because you got to communicate with the best minds, those around you, but in the past as well, and in the present. And if it's on the printed page, read that wherever you get it, you know.
That's right.
Okay, Norman, this has been great. I really want to thank you. And I want to remind people at 2 this afternoon, August the 27th. By the way, this is my wife's birthday.
Happy birthday, Pam.
Pamela Hurley Tashaka.
Tashaka.
And she doesn't hide her age. She's 67.
Right on.
Being 67. Yeah. Best thing going in my life. Pam. Right. Happy birthday, baby.
Happy birthday, Pam. And when you get old, let me know.
Well, when Pam hits 67, she's 68. So that's her attitude towards age. You know, right. I mean? We met in 2005, and she was 50 then. So, and I was 1 year younger than she is right now. So what does that tell you? Yeah.
All right. Great lady. Great woman.
Better believe it. You know, best decision in my life.
How about that?
And
I'm a witness.
Stephanie Clark, happy Earth Day, Pam. Done. I'm glad that you celebrate your wife. It needs to be seen. Oh, yeah. Well, I celebrate her every day. In fact, I've always told the brothers, don't just be giving your wife something when you're in trouble. Give it to her all the time.
That's right.
Huh? Just because you want to put a smile on her face. You know what I mean? That's the thing. You know what I mean? Whatever it is.
That's right.
That smile. That's what love is. Remember we did the thing on the Twa, and the Twa said that we built great cities and we built great civilizations, but it wasn't making us happy. And then they gave up on it. And they were talking about Kemet because they gave birth to Kemet, by the way, the Anu people of Twa. But they said happiness is when the hunter brings the antelope home and gets a smile from his wife. That's happiness.
That's happiness.
So one of my viewers said, I bring the antelope home in this house. So whatever it is you do that puts a smile on somebody's face, do it regularly. I mean, that's what love is.
That's right.
That's what love is. And every time I see Norman, it puts a smile on my face. I'm going to enjoy him today.
Ditto, ditto.
Right. And that was
a great friendship. I am blessed, truly blessed.
Me too. Me too. And the key thing that tied us all together was love. Love of self, love of our people.
That's right.
Love of each other. And that was the motivating force. And that is the most powerful force going on the planet. You know I love you, brother. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Ditto. Love you back.
Yeah. So that's it, folks. So turn on. And by the way, those of you that haven't subscribe, and also make a donation. You see the directions here because these shows cost money. This feed in that we're going to have today is coming out of my pocket because the brother is going to be there all day doing a live feed, you know, and it'll be on this show. So make a donation, huh? Make a donation. So Hotep, watch the show at 2 Pacific time. And until next week, Hotep. Thanks, Norman.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.